We have a challenge here. We have only 15 minutes, 15 minutes for discussions, and it's quite a challenge given the richness of and variety of the presentation so far. Can I invite people to be very concise in their questions or remarks, starting first with your name and the organization, and making your questions very short, please.
Merci beaucoup, messieurs les orateurs. Je m'appelle Salif Oluwadara, je suis du Togo. Je fais partie de la coordination togolaise des organisations paysannes.
I come from the agricultural producer and farmers organizations in Togo. I would like to have some more explanations from Nora in particular. Can you say a little bit more about the role of pastoralism?
Thank you. Number 2.
Yes, Valérie Soumont, Prana Sustainable Water. We have a tool that is correlating the trade finance. So, for example, for commodities who are traded today, but for deliveries in 1, 2, 3, 5 years ahead of production, with the infrastructure finance for the what we call the biorefinery, so wastewater transformation plants, providing fertilizers that are much more cheaper than the classical mineral fertilizers, biogas, clean water, etc. And I'm just wondering if the European Commission is providing a policy or a tool for correlating also massively the trade finance with the infrastructure finance for agriculture mainly.
Thank you. Number, yes.
Okay, right. Well, thank you. I'm from Learning Academy Worldwide. It's a Swedish-based non-profit that works within youth development in South Africa with a focus on agriculture. One of my questions on this issue of the right conditions is so crucial. But I want to know, right conditions for who? Is there a dialogue about the clarity required on who determines or defines the right conditions, number one? Secondly, is there a dialogue about the sort of assimilation of integration of research institutes, universities, and entities in relation to the needs of the small farmer?
Thank you, Marek.
Oui, bonjour. Marek Poznanski du collectif Stratégie Alimentaire, une agri-agence membre du réseau agricole travaillant avec les
and we work together with some of the organizations present here today. I had a question. Mr. van der Ploeg said quite clearly that most farmers are still poor, but the idea is to make these, to allow these farmers to develop and become wealthier so that they have more resources, more means to fight against poverty to start with, and then to progress, to develop further. But in order for that to happen, you have to take into account their circumstances. You need good policies which allow these farmers, and these farmers find themselves in a difficult situation. We need to find a way of allowing them to evolve, to progress. Mr. Ridolfi said several times that we need to have measures to help family farming. What was your starting point? Was your starting point the conditions in which poor farmers find themselves? Was that your starting point? And if that's the case, what measures can be adopted to help them? There may be other measures as well. Farming is quite a diverse sector, so how could you focus on those farmers? And some of the solutions you came forward didn't seem to be entirely well tailored to the situation.
Well, thank you for those questions, and I'm hoping that the panelists are going to be also short and precise in responding to them. Let's start with questions directed at Nora, and we go right round.
Thank you. I invite the person who addressed this question to me to download and read. Bon, je vais parler en français puisque vous.
I'll say that in French. Because you asked the question in French. Could I encourage you to look at the recommendations? You'll find the web link in the slides. I gather those slides have been circulated. I want to spare you the detail here and now. But as I said, pastoralism and pastoral systems, pastoralists are often forgotten. When you talk about small producers, you think about farmers. Mr. Ridolfi read out the list of other forms of producers, and pastoralists tend to be forgotten. And they have been particularly affected by the concept of modernization described by Mr. van der Ploeg. I mean, we said that smallholders are destined to fail, but that applies even more to pastoralists. I mean, pastoralists, it's all a question of settling as well. So there are recommendations adopted in the context of the UN, adopted by all your governments, and those recommendations say that pastoralism is often the best way of managing certain types of ecosystem. I mean, mobility and modernization is very important, and governments need to understand that so that the necessary conditions are put into place to reflect the complexity of these systems. So perhaps I could encourage you to read those recommendations for more detail.
Thank you. I suppose the question on trade financing could be directed to Mr. Mizi.
Thank you. Two questions. First of all, right conditions. Clearly, what we are trying to do with the support to farmers' organizations, even Nora mentioned the EU-Africa platform, is to create and embed in the continental free trade area a real platform of multi-stakeholders to actually engage in policy making. Now, normally this exists in CADEP. The question is, has CADEP, and we support as well a lot CADEP, and there is a CADEP partners program and donors program, has CADEP delivered in the real policy dialogue? Because normally in a CADEP process, there are farmers' organizations, there are small farm holders in dialogue, but we still have the majority of African countries which are not investing in agriculture. So there is a disconnect in this dialogue between the right conditions, and when we speak about the right conditions, is the right conditions to attract interest, investment, youth, empowerment in agriculture and food systems. Otherwise, the dialogue will become lip service. We have a dialogue with governments. We have budget support, which actually has a number of indicators which trigger financing when things go right, and when they are not right, we stop financing. But in general, policy dialogue has to be multi-stakeholder and across the value chain. Clearly, as Roberto said, e-commerce can bypass a bit the dimension of dialogue, but you still need a dimension of policy dialogue, because we know that the large majority of markets remain of a local and sub-regional nature. So we need to support the dialogue, and we will continue supporting that dialogue and empowering leaders and farmers' organizations to be in that dialogue, because you can't have good policies. The ideas are there. We can track a lot of ideas out there on what's working, what's not, between agroecology, agroforestry, research. But when we find at some countries, some are working well, and it's the usual 10, 15 countries, But on pastoralists, the question is there a regional debate, a continental debate, which actually implements that pastoralism strategy from a holistic way between ECOWAS, COMESA, AAC, or, for example, the Continental Free Trade Area? Because pastoralists move, there are big challenges which are cross-border, which require cross-border solutions, not just country solutions. On trade finance and infrastructure, clearly, beyond the external investment plan that we are working on and we are rolling out, and the framework conditions, as you know, 3 pillars, including the discussions around the right framework conditions and technical assistance, clearly a priority is to create that infrastructure, both soft and hard infrastructure, at country level and at regional level. And what I will invite the person who has asked the question is to contact our delegations at country level, because it's there where the infrastructure package is created. What we do in headquarters is to try as much as possible, where budget support is, to trigger, to nudge the governments where things are not working, where in terms of either hard infrastructure or soft infrastructure. It's clear that rural infrastructure has a key role to play. We can't speak about creating intra-regional trade in Africa without roads, without the necessary hubs, including digital hubs and fiber optic cables, if we really want to upscale connectivity in Africa.
Mr. Rodolphe, you want to respond to Marek's question?
Yes, thank you. No, in fact, I didn't propose any measure. For me, we have to work. Your question, if I'm not wrong, is what could be the measures to support poor family farmers? And I have to add the poor family fishermen and foresters and so forth. Four pillars for this in our experience. First of all, education, so training, education. Secondly, inputs and innovative inputs, which is not only seeds and fertilizer, but is much more than that. Is technological inputs, is innovative approaches to commerce. 3, finance, access to finance, access to the right finance, because there is the wrong finance and the right finance. Quickly, wrong finance is the one asking you guarantees and charging you a lot of money for the money they give you, right? This is impossible finance. Let's not say right or wrong. Let's say possible or impossible. Poor farmer with no collateral, he has in front of him or her a question, possible or impossible? And very, very often is impossible. So there are countries where the land lease can be used as a collateral for loans. Fantastic. This is policy. This is government. There are countries where the lease of the land cannot be used as a collateral. Policy, governments. And last, access to markets. I only propose e-commerce because it's striking me how there are experiences that are working on that. But it's not the only solution, by the way. As Leonard said, the dialogue by the stakeholders with the government is fundamental to keep that online. And on one point that I think was asked, how can we ensure the assimilation of the results of the research? Well, I've been in the Fund Council of the CGIAR for so many years, and a number of scientists, they detested me when I stopped funding that circuit, for the reason that the research is good for a development actor only if it's delivered to the farmer. If he ends up only in a book, in a shelf, it's not good. So we need to reinforce that passage, and I strengthen the concept of GFAR that could do that. in my view. So the assimilation passed through a dissemination. We have an idea of an access to innovation trust fund, which could do exactly that. But we will talk about that another occasion. Thank you.
We are really pressed for time. I'll take a couple of questions, yeah, and Elizabeth and the gentleman who has been sort of insisting from the farmers' organization. Then we close. Unfortunately.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to add on what Roberto has responded with regard to the question from the gentleman from Learning Academy Worldwide, because he asked whether there is a kind of platform or dialogue where the smallholder farmers' research needs are integrated into some of these researches that are done. Yeah, I would say that we have a continental platform, the Forum for Agricultural Research in Africa, and we also have regional platforms. For example, for ESA region, we have ASALECA, where as smallholder farmers, we are represented on their boards. But of course, these are private sector-led initiatives. They also come with their challenges. Majority of them are heavily donor-funded. So in terms of service delivery, it becomes really a challenge because it has limitations when it comes to funding some of these initiatives.
Yeah, thank you. I'm John from a farmer organization. This is an organization that started very small and continued to grow. We started with a capital of about 500 euros, but now we have grown our turnover to over 3 million euros. The reason was because of certifications. We are fair trade and organic. But now, of recent, EU is changing the standards suddenly. Like for organic, the threshold for chemicals has all of a sudden changed. For us as producers, we pay a lot to maintain these certifications. So why can't EU give us a window for us to review our internal controls for 1 or 2 years so that we can be able to maintain the benefits to our farmers and the certifications? Secondly, can EU create us a window, like in Antwerp, a small store, so that we carry our coffee through the value chain to Europe, so that we can gain from spot prices? Thank you.
Thank you. Can I have a contribution from Jan Dawa as one of the panelists? Then we'll have reactions, and I'll close by also my own questions.
Yes, there was this question about smallholders very often being poor. Now, I completely agree with the observation of the gentleman. Poverty is not intrinsic to smallholder agriculture. Yeah, they have developed many strategies to face the situation, including multifunctionality, creating new linkages to market. Nonetheless, it's still due to circumstances, a bitter reality, that many of them fall into poverty, climb out of it, fall again into it. I myself worked in Guinea-Bissau shortly after the liberation of the country. I worked there for several years, and in the south of Guinea-Bissau you have one of the most beautiful agricultural systems in the world. It's rice growing in tropical rice polders, and it's the Balanta people who are the main producers, like in Basse-Casamance, where you have the same system like in Guinea-Conakry. Now, you start crying when you see this reality regressing. What happens is that the state did not develop over time an adequate infrastructure to make the rice go from the south towards the main cities, especially Bissau. There was total neglect of the reality of this smallholder agriculture. And in the meantime, there was massive imports, growing imports of very cheap rice from Asia. And this is the bitter reality that there are structural problems. Apart from, indeed, education, inputs, access to finance, to markets, there is another issue that is the structural problem in the context. Yeah, and we need the political willingness, the adequate state interventions to correct this. That should be on the agenda. Just, it was rightly observed, as the universities and the research institutes have to redefine their agenda so as to meet better, far better, finally, with the prospects of smallholder producers. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Mizi, you want to respond to the gentleman?
On certification, there is a process, I understand, between various services, us, Santé, and Agri on the certification of organic. What is clear is we will continue boosting. We support a lot ACP. We have fit for market on certification schemes of horticultural products. We are also discussing with the African Union and hopefully next year under the PANAF continued support to SPS. So if there are specific questions on specific products in the organic sector, I'll put you in touch with my colleagues who are around the table so that we can see which product is this concerned with, and I'll get in touch with my colleagues in Santé and in DG Agri to see what we can do and what are the requirements, what is the transition, and so we'll see what we can do on this particular problem. Okay.
Thank you very much, panelists, for your contribution. Just also wanted to make the final call, my last word. Very insightful discussions, very informative, very analytical, new dimensions. I learned quite a few things myself. And many quotable quotes, and I'll quote one specifically from Nora, which was saying almost verbatim, I quote, that the future of smallholders will be largely an outcome of the political choices that are going to be made now. And in making political choices, there is going to be need for dialogue. And that dialogue has to be inclusive, and inclusive meaning that those that are at the center of it, farmers, should really also drive part of the dialogue system. Then the final quote really was about, was from Ms. Ridolfi, who was saying that farming, and also from Jan Dawa, that the sustainability, I mean, smallholder farmers are indispensable to the sustainability, not only of agriculture, but of the entire food system. And the reasons are very clear, and I hope that we're taking away a lot of lessons, a lot of knowledge as we prepare for the next session. 10 minutes break for coffee. You can bring your coffee into the room, then we start immediately because we have 1 o'clock to aim for, otherwise we won't be able to continue. Well, thank you.
Prenez-le en salle parce qu'on doit terminer à 13h.